Israel is a tiny country. It's situated along the coast. A jet that's been hijacked, flying at 600 miles an hour, will take about a minute and a half to cross the entire country of Israel. It's where Israel's most populated cities are, right along that coast. So Israel has close to zero margin for error in countering and protecting itself against a hijacked airplane. Now, if this Malaysian jet has been hijacked, and there's a sense among Israeli intelligence officials that that is a possibility, then Israel feels that it has to take the necessary precautions. The government met with security officials this week and decided on a number of emergency measures. Those remain classified, secret, but one has been published. Foreign aircraft approaching Israel's shores will have to identify themselves far earlier than has previously been the case.
So IDF thinks it is a possibility that this plane is being weaponized somewhere.
Well, they can't rule out that possibility. The Israeli press today quoted a number of
We were told 3 partial meltdowns, don't worry about it. Now we know it was 100% core melt in all 3 reactors.
Japan is, by orders of magnitude, many times worse than Chernobyl. Never in my life did I think that 6 nuclear reactors would be at risk.
Well, TEPCO is like the little Dutch boy. All of a sudden we have cracks in the dike, you put a finger here, you put a finger there, and all of a sudden new leaks start to occur, and they're overwhelmed. Literally making it up as they go along. We're in totally uncharted territories. You get any nuclear engineering book, look at the last chapter, and this scenario is not contained in the last chapter of any nuclear engineering textbook on the planet Earth. So they're making it up as they go along, and we are the guinea pigs for this science experiment that's taking place.
All radiation is damaging. It's cumulative. Each dose you get adds to your risk of getting cancer.
Within days of the Fukushima Daiichi catastrophe beginning, we were getting fallout coming down in rain in the United States, not in insignificant quantities. And also, of course, the seafood. Not only does the ocean's currents bring the radioactivity this way, but also the sea life itself, the bluefin tuna, migrated from Japan to North America and carried the radioactive cesium in its flesh over here.
Wow, not a good time to be eating tuna.
The food chain remains contaminated for hundreds or thousands of years, and we'll start seeing lung cancer and leukemia, I think 2 to 5 years from now. And then solid cancers will start appearing 15 to 60, 70 years later. So the ace up the sleeve of the nuclear industry is the incubation time for cancer. It takes a long time for cancers to develop once you have inhaled or been exposed to these radioactive elements. And no cancer identifies its origin. And so there is already a level of cancer in society, but it's going to increase dramatically.
The problem is not really under control.
It will not be under control for, it's estimated, between 40 and 100 years from now.
There's no way to clean it up. They say 40 years, but they can't clean it up. They can't.
And the site's still unstable and vulnerable to natural disasters.
If there is another earthquake, a serious one, 6, 7, 8 or 9 magnitude, that would rattle all these 1,060 tanks. It would rattle the damaged cores, spent fuel, whose structures have already weakened. Yes. That's a potential very, very serious threat.
Approximately 300 tons of water was filtering through the site until early this month, becoming laced with radioactive materials and then seeping into the sea. Another factor is the ever-increasing amount of water accumulating inside damaged infrastructure. Once it makes its way into reactor buildings, it mixes with radioactive isotopes. For months, TEPCO workers have been pumping up 400 tons of water every day and storing it in tanks on site.
There's 1,060 tanks, stainless steel water tanks, that are holding the water, which they keep pumping into the damaged reactors and the spent fuel storage pools.
From the air, the scale of the problems at Fukushima become clear. The growing mass of storage tanks now dwarfs the plant itself. More than 1 million tons of highly radioactive water is now stored here.
But the tanks have been hastily built.
They're made of steel plates, bolted together, rather than welded. Last week, workers detected a major leak in one of those tanks. About 300 tons of water escaped, releasing several quadrillion becquerels of radioactive particles.
Experts have often pointed out how vulnerable they are to damage.
The tanks, though, have been put together very quickly. There's no guarantee they'll last. Their seals are made of rubber, and the joints and bolts are corroding, and they may last not more than 5 years.
So the tank farm has grown dramatically, and it's on the hill. Of course, the problem is, because it's on the hill, the water flows down, and if there's an earthquake, all of these pipes are held together with plastic piping, not much different than what you've got on a swimming pool. So the plastic pipe will snap, and that water will just run right down that roadway directly into the ocean.
And how long the contamination has been leaking into the water?
Very likely since the explosions and the meltdown at Fukushima Daiichi in March of 2011.
Wow, that is quite a long time. Now, how much and what sort of radiation is leaking into the Pacific? I know there's all different types, so if you can explain that in a little detail.
Well, clearly what we've seen now is the movement of radioactive hydrogen, tritium, which is a mobile radioactive isotope, but clearly radioactive cesium, 134, 137, strontium-90. We're seeing a full range of radioactive contaminants now moving, which indicate that the damaged cores of these reactors, the meltdowns themselves, are now contributing to the contamination of the Pacific Ocean and groundwater that's moving at about a rate of 300 to 400 metric tons per day. So
that radiation has been leaking into the water and polluting the fish continuously for the last 2 years.
Radioactive iodine-129, its half-life is 17 million years, plus strontium, plus cesium, plus tritium, and I could go on and on and on. If it gets into the sea, the algae concentrated hundreds of times, then the crustaceans concentrated hundreds of times, then the little fish, then the big fish, then us. Because we stand on the apex of the food chain. You can't taste these radioactive elements, you can't see them, and you can't smell them. They're silent.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German Marine Research Institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years.
The fuel core of Unit 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. More than 1,500 fuel rods sit in a damaged storage pool 30 meters above ground.
Yeah, the amount of radioactivity in the rods themselves is about 14,000 times that of the Hiroshima bomb.
We are dealing with diabolical energy. E equals mc squared. It's the energy that blows up nuclear bombs. Einstein said, nuclear power's a hell of a way to boil water.
They need to remove those fuel rods from the pool because if there's another earthquake, Building 4 would go down probably, and all those fuel rods would be exposed to the air and they would burn, and they would release 10 times more radiation or cesium than was released at Chernobyl, huge amounts, and pollute much of Japan and the Northern Hemisphere. So We're in a nuclear crisis at the moment.
If there's another earthquake and Building 4 collapses, which contains the cooling pool with fresh fuel, I'm going to evacuate my family from Boston.
So they've put a crane on top of that building, which is shaky anyway, and they're going to lift the fuel assemblies out one by one with the crane, and it will be done manually. Normally, those rods are removed by computer control with millimetres to spare. It's a very delicate operation.
The fuel rods must be kept submerged and must not touch each other or break. Nuclear experts warn any mishaps could cause an explosion many times worse than that one here in March 2011.
Because if several rods touch each other, you could reach criticality and the whole fuel pool could go critical. Or if the rods break as they're being lifted out, large amounts of radiation would escape from the rods and the area would have to be evacuated, meaning that if the area is evacuated, the continuous operation of cooling 5 spent fuel pools and 3 melted cores would stop. Need I go on?
The Canadian town of Port Hope once provided uranium for the Manhattan Project, the effort that created the atomic bombs that hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. But the town's refinery left it with low-level radioactive waste. Now, Canadian authorities are surveying it to see if a cleanup is necessary. The federal government launched the survey this summer. Officials are checking 4,800 houses and buildings in response to concerns of local residents. Nuclear waste from the refinery was mixed with soil and used to build the foundations of homes. The Canadian government later conducted a cleanup of the contaminated soil, but it suspended work in the 1980s after the disposal site became full. Authorities say low-level radioactive materials with readings over the safety guidelines may remain in homes. The survey will take 5 years, and officials say if they find radioactive materials over the permissible level, they'll dig up the waste and transport it to a new disposal site. They're planning to complete the site by 2015. The United States has conducted a subcritical nuclear test for the first time in almost 2 years. Officials with the National Nuclear Security Administration said scientists carried out the test at a site in the state of Nevada. The scientists wanted to examine how plutonium reacts to forces produced by chemical high explosives, but their experiment did not produce a nuclear chain reaction explosion. Government leaders declared in 1992 that they would suspend tests that include nuclear explosions, but they permitted such subcritical tests, which are allowed under the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. U.S. President Barack Obama has said he'll pursue a nuclear-free world, but American scientists have conducted several subcritical tests during his presidency. And people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the cities that experienced the atomic bombings in 1945, criticized the tests.
I wonder why President Obama decided to conduct the test. He should take to heart the feelings of the residents of Hiroshima.
I feel sad that Americans still don't understand how we survivors feel. We are not submitting protest letters for no reason.
U.S. scientists have carried out 27 subcritical tests. They say the experiments are necessary to maintain the safety and effectiveness of nuclear weapons.
Japan's new administration under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is working on transforming its energy policies. The trade minister says the country will continue exporting nuclear infrastructure after ensuring that it's safe.
Japan has accumulated technology and human resources related to nuclear power. We would like the chance to put these to peaceful use. Meeting partners' requests and ensuring safety will be the major premises of this effort. And we also want to keep exporting our nuclear power infrastructure.
Japan has been promoting exports of nuclear power generation facilities even after the nuclear accident in Fukushima. The previous administration, led by the Democratic Party, has signed pacts with countries such as Vietnam and Jordan in 2011, enabling it to transport nuclear technology. Motegi's comments suggest the new government is willing to follow the previous government's policy.
Russia will help China build 2 nuclear reactors at a power plant in China. This is part of a plan to expand energy cooperation between the two nations. The agreement was signed by Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev and Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao when they met in Moscow. The two leaders also agreed to expand bilateral cooperation on nuclear energy usage. Russia's State Nuclear Energy Corporation Rosatom says the construction of 2 new reactors will begin later this month at a Chinese nuclear power plant in Jiangsu province. Medvedev said the two nations will soon sign another agreement to boost energy cooperation, not only on nuclear energy, but also on oil and natural gas. Russia has been active to export nuclear power technology and facilities to emerging economies. That's despite the nuclear accident in Japan last year. The Russian government will help Bangladesh build its first nuclear power plant. Russian President Vladimir Putin said his country will offer money and manpower for the project. Putin announced the agreement in Moscow after meeting Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Moscow will finance the deal with a loan of $500 million. A Russian state-owned company will build the plant about 200 kilometers from the capital Dhaka. The plant will house 2 nuclear reactors, each one capable of producing 1 million kilowatts of electricity. Construction is to begin early next year, with completion slated for 2020. Russia's export of nuclear power technology and facilities has continued undeterred by the 2011 nuclear accident in Japan. It's targeting markets in the emerging Asian economies of China, India, and Vietnam.
The related H7N9 virus that still harbors a near 30% mortality rating even with modern treatment and antiviral medications has been shown to mutate over time within laboratory settings. Authorities say that a mutation will likely make the disease more widespread as it adapts to the human body, making every new case of the virus a strong potential for it to become more virulent. A sharp increase in thyroid cancers between both children and young adults is being witnessed within the Fukushima prefecture of Japan, while pro-nuclear officials continue to dismiss the ongoing nuclear disaster at the Fukushima site as the cause of the disease. Agencies are reporting that a meeting at Japan's environmental ministry showed that quoted experts were discussing the ability for heavy radiation leaks to be linked to thyroid cancer so soon after the event, while noted scientists continue to argue that the catastrophe must be handled now before the whole world is at stake. In related news, a Navy sailor on board the USS Ronald Reagan as it deployed to the Fukushima nuclear site to assist with cleanup and recovery efforts explains the radioactive snow that servicemen and women were forced to endure as freezing air over the Pacific began to meet with radioactive steam from the nuclear disaster, causing reported cases of severe radiation.
Let me distinguish between professional politicians and the public at large. The public is not paying close attention to the ins and outs of how a treasury auction goes. They shouldn't. They're worrying about their family, they're worrying about their jobs, they're worrying about their neighborhood. They've got a lot of other things on their plate.
This is what it looks under normal visual conditions. I will be showing you what it looks like under infrared light now. And I'll be using this way of showing the cloud cover because it's a lot easier to discern the difference between regular clouds and what I call chemtrails. This haze that is beside the striping that you see here, for example, is also the result of aerosol spraying from the airplanes. It falls down through the atmosphere in sheets. Imagine having a car with an exhaust that emits a plume of smoke that follows wherever you drive, and it just stays there and gets bigger and bigger. How long do you think it would last before you were pulled over and given a citation for pollution? Well, when you take a look at what's happening in the skies from airplanes, this is exactly what's going on up in our skies now. This is not just from increased air traffic. This is a deliberate campaign. It takes specialized equipment. It costs money, planes, pilots, and infrastructures to do what you can see here. The only legitimate excuse I have heard for this kind of spraying from airplanes is to mitigate global warming. There is a patent out there from 1991 from Hughes Aircraft that explains exactly what we're seeing going on here. The patent is about mixing a fine dust of aluminum oxide, barium oxide, and thorium to make a cloud cover that will in some way mitigate global warming by blocking out the sun. On this day, I had 3 overflights from Hercules aircraft and 1 jet plane from the military, and I wonder if they were taking air samples of the fallout from this day. In the clip that is about to come up now, you'll see a Hercules aircraft overhead, and you'll see that there are 2 blinks of light from the bottom of the airplane, and I'm wondering if they're taking infrared ground cover pictures. An entire week of spraying like this is filmed here from the same location. Nobody really knows exactly what combination of chemicals and stuff they're putting out in the planes. They could be different planes, different effects. Instead of mitigating global warming, which is in itself a political campaign from FN to get us to pay taxes for CO2 climate gas, instead of taxing us for breathing, perhaps we should be taxing people for doing the actual pollution. Here you can see how the chemtrail is rotating on its own axis. Quite often I've seen these vortexes. They may come from the plane itself. They may be electromagnetically generated, I don't know. The HARP antenna system around the world, one of which is in Norway, one of the largest, is rumored to be used with these chemicals in the sky because they are metallic. What they are attempting to do is anybody's guess. If this is a military experiment, it's a global military experiment. If it's global, it must have something to do with the United Nations. I would not assume that the United Nations has been given the power to pollute our skies and poison us from above. So I think we have a global problem here. In Norway, this spraying has been going on since at least 2003. That's when I first noticed it. I notice it because I'm a photographer. I've been taking pictures of the sky since I first picked up my first camera. That was in the 1960s. I'm trained to notice things like the difference between a contrail that disappears after 5 or 6 seconds and a chemtrail that lasts for hours on end. What we see here is really criminally insane. It's a crime against humanity. No one knows where this stuff is going to fall down. At, let's say, 31,000 feet over Oslo, Norway, this stuff might end up in Russia or Portugal or Italy. The amount of pollution in our environment for the time being is radically apocalyptic. While we have this spraying going on in our skies, we have radiation from Fukushima that is not being reported. It's really serious. It's getting worse. We have all the damage done from the oil and gas leaks all over the sea, including the Gulf of Mexico. Last month I heard of a gas blowout in the Northern Sea. It was at 4,000 meters depth, impossible to contain. That was a month ago. I haven't heard anything since. We are not being told how bad the earth is being polluted at this time. We are being told that it's necessary to take our vaccines so we don't get sick. And I find that very difficult to believe when we can take a look at the skies, notice the pollution going on, and notice that it seems that someone's trying to make us sick. So should we take those vaccines? Now the people that are trying to do this They must be criminally insane. They need to be stopped. They need to be made responsible for what they've done. And somehow, this stuff needs to be cleaned up. I can only hope that there's some futuristic technology we just don't know about yet that can fix this job. Because if we don't, this planet has a serious problem. How are our next generations of life going to be able to support themselves when we've polluted the atmosphere with radiation from power plants, sabotage, from depleted or enriched uranium weapons used in wars, oil and gas leakages all over the sea, along with radiation, and this chemical soup in our sky. Our food is poisoned. Our medicine is poisoned. Our air and water is poisoned. Our oceans are poisoned. If people don't wake up to what is really going on and start pointing fingers to those involved and having them stopped in some way, it doesn't look like there's going to be a future on this planet. My own personal understanding of all of this is that it's a representation of a great polarization period on this planet, where there is an immense amount of evil, and there is also equally an immense amount of good. The reason for this polarization is so that people can wake up and ask questions as to how they want to live in their future, who they are as a human being, to wake up to their spiritual identity, their personal responsibility, and to become activated as a human being at a higher level of awareness. There are a lot of good things happening on this earth at this time, as well as the bad things. As we move towards 2012, December, it is my hope that these things will have stopped, that people will have been arrested, and that there is a change on this planet where the truth is more valued than money, and people become more valued than money. Because as this planet traverses the galactic plane in what is assumed to be the end of December this year, we will be entering into a different magnetic reality, one that we really don't know that much about how it's going to affect the Earth, but it will affect our planet. It will also affect our climate. Now, if you live in a world of chance reality, random universe, mechanical universe, this can be a scary thing. But if you live in a reality where the universe is not chance, that there is a meaning behind everything, and you are aware of your identity, then you can look forward to this change and know that it's going to be a time where what we're seeing here has ended. The people that have ruled this planet in this way for so many years, so many thousands of years, will not be here. Humanity will be able to realize its potential without these negative influences. So what we're seeing in the skies here is to really get you to become awake. And when I say awake, I really also mean aware of how the world really works and aware of who you are, your personal identity, and your part in this. What we're seeing here is a result of mentality that has to do something with competition. People competing against the forces of nature, people competing against each other for dominance, natural resources, money, rule. But the thing is that we're all connected together. Already in 1924, Max Planck discovered that consciousness, human consciousness, was something very special because it was influencing the test he and Einstein were doing, the split screen test in advanced physics. Max Planck was very fascinated by the idea that consciousness could actually change physical things. And his research showed him that consciousness indeed was stronger than even gamma radiation. It could penetrate almost anything. And if you keep your focus over time, a quiet, focused attention on what you really want, then it will manifest. So when you see skies like this, what you want to vision in your mind's eye is all this stuff gone. Visualize a blue sky, a clean sky. Do what you can to harmonize your thinking. Get rid of competition in yourself and in your life. Realize that everything bad really comes out of the idea of competition. The idea that money is a limited resource. Money is a creation of man. It can be used in many different ways, better than the way we do today. if we didn't compete over money, we just might start working for each other instead of for money. Imagine what would happen to our society if we started to think that instead of trying to dominate nature, dominate each other, that we start working together, that we clean up our act, that we harmonize our emotions, our thinking, our beliefs, our values, our actions towards ourselves and the rest of the universe in such a way that we create an earth that is a lot better than the one we have now. I would suggest that there is a tendency for this process to continue on to the future, even though we're seeing a lot of evil in the sky right now. It will stop. It has to stop. It won't stop until you become engaged, but it will stop eventually. So I hope you've learned something from this. I hope you understand there is a great difference between condensation and chemical spraying. This is just not an accident. It's happening on purpose. We just don't know why.
Я 7 лет болею.
Тебе сейчас сколько?
Мне уже 14.
7 лет болеешь, да? Чем болеешь?
Системно-красная лучанка.
А что у тебя болит, расскажи?
У меня болело сердце. Что?
Ты не расстраивайся. Не расстраивайся. Ну, уже все прошло, уже не болит. Ну, Оленька, все, давай глазки уже уберите, глазки красивые, давай убери, уже ты большая девочка, все. Не болели, сейчас уже тебе легче. Ну, расскажи, что еще тебя болело?
Болела у меня голова, то коленки. Да я сюда и обратно легла. А теперь стало мне хорошо. Вот.
Молодец у нас.
Les liens avec l'OMS sont des liens de collaboration, car pendant 15 ans, en tant que médecin tropicaliste, j'ai travaillé dans les comités directeurs de recherche pour la malaria et la filariose et que j'ai une très grande estime pour l'OMS. Et depuis 1986, j'ai une très grande tristesse face à l'absence de l'OMS pendant 5 années sur le terrain à Tchernobyl. Pendant 5 ans, on ne l'a pas vu. On ne l'a pas vu. Elle a laissé l'Agence internationale pour l'énergie atomique sur place faire ses recherches. C'est dommage.
Dr. Michel Fernet, retired, Medical Faculty, University of Bâle, is part of a campaign denouncing the conflict of interest between two organizations of the UN, the IAEA, International Agency for Atomic Energy, promoter of nuclear industry, and the WHO, World Health Organization. An agreement was signed in 1959 between those organizations. The WHO is prevented from undertaking independent medical research on the health effects of radiation or from informing populations on the consequences of accidents like Chernobyl, when the atomic lobby does not agree. Here, a letter is being delivered for Kofi Annan and Dr. Brundtland, Director General of the WHO, asking for an amendment of this agreement and freedom for the WHO to work freely on the health effects of radiation.
Oui, Daniel Tarantona, Anne Kern, qui est directrice de l'un des clusters. Nous avons bien reçu une lettre de votre part dans laquelle vous avez déjà exprimé votre préoccupation. Nous y avons répondu en vous disant que vos préoccupations, de notre point de vue, n'étaient pas fondées. Nous vous promettons d'examiner davantage la lettre dont j'ignore le contenu que vous venez de nous remettre aujourd'hui et le docteur Brundtland y répondra avant la fin de la semaine. Je vous remercie tous d'être venus vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. Merci. D'accord.
Est-ce que vous pourriez signer le reçu comme quoi?
Yes.
Voilà, cher monsieur, est-ce que vous pourriez signer là, comme quoi vous avez bien reçu notre missive, et ajouter votre qualité, s'il vous plaît.
In 1995, the Director General of WHO, Dr. Hiroshi Nakajima, tried to inform on Chernobyl by organizing in Geneva an international conference with 700 experts and physicians. This tentative was blocked. The International Agency for Atomic Energy blocked the proceedings, which were never published. The truth on the consequences of Chernobyl would have been a disaster for the promotion of the atomic industry.
L'interdiction de publier qui est tombée sur le congrès OMS va peut-être, je dis peut-être, être levée par le prochain congrès de l'OMS. Mais l'AIEA sera là également, ne vous faites aucun souci. L'UNSCER, l'AIEA, avec des finances fantastiques, et d'acheter un savant dans un pays pauvre, ça ne coûte rien. Avec 10 000 $, vous achetez beaucoup de monde. Très bon souvenir de conférence, dialogue très fort. Je pense que la conférence ici est très bonne, mais je pense que ça a été la meilleure conférence en 1995. Excellent.
Mais malheureusement, même les Japonais n'ont pas pris de recommandation de cette conférence.
Pourquoi est-ce que les proceedings qu'on avait commandés n'ont pas pu être publiés?
À cette époque-là, parce que c'est une conférence organisée conjointement avec AIEA. Ça, c'est un problème.
Et ici, vous êtes, par exemple, cette conférence, l'OMS est plus libre qu'à Genève, ici.
Non, moi, je ne suis plus le directeur général, je suis en personne privée.
For this international conference on the medical consequences of the Chernobyl catastrophe, organized with the WHO in Kiev in June 2001, the physicians of Chernobyl asked Dr. Nakajima to be honorary president.
Vous ne considérez pas contradictoire le lien qu'il y a entre l'OMS et l'AIEA pour la pleine liberté de l'OMS?
Oui, mais ça c'est signalé, mais ça c'est, je vous explique. Bon, ça c'est pas, je suis directeur général, donc je suis responsable. Oui. Mais c'est surtout c'est mon département de conseil de regard, parce que le IAEA dépend à Conseil de la sécurité des Nations Unies. Oui. Et nous, toutes les agences spécialisées dépendent au Conseil de développement de l'économique sociale. Et ces organisations qui dépendent du Conseil de sécurité sont pas hiérarchiques, nous sommes tous égaux, mais pour affaires atomiques, d'utilisation militaire, utilisation pour
civil,
pacifique, civil, c'est eux, c'est l'autorité.
C'est eux qui commandent.
Never before had such an authority admitted that health institutions are subordinate to the promoters of the atom. The WHO and the IAEA Two UN agencies, when working together, should be free to fulfill their institutional tasks for peace and the world's well-being. Contradictions, tensions and conflicts which exist in the UN system were expressed during this conference by the protagonists of the 1995 WHO conference and the physicians and scientists of the civil society.
The consequences of Chernobyl do not fade away, but actually grows increasingly uncertain and in many ways more intense. The United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, put it very clear when he said that the legacy of Chernobyl will be with us and with our descendants for generations to come.
The representative of the UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs shares the view of Kofi Annan, who estimates at 9 million the number of victims and says the tragedy of Chernobyl is only beginning.
Иногда жаловался, но буквально на полчаса еще мы в Молодечно, когда лежали, чтобы встать на ножки, но это очень. Мне тоже кажется, что как было, так и осталось.
Сейчас вроде бы так функция уже восстанавливается. Пошевели пальцами.
Работай.
Вот, и планируется продолжение химиотерапии.
Поэтому он не может. Тут надо... А где дедушка?
Там есть, там налеты. Особенно на медали. Это обрабатывать, спасибо всем.
Хорошо, я ему брал сегодня.
И уровень 30-го поделения?
Сегодня.
Сегодня, да? Хорошо. Я в Мозыре. Мозырь, да. От зоны вот этой, это очень близко. Напрямую от Чернобыля 80 километров. По прямой, вот, если не по дороге.
И тогда вас измеряли, сколько у вас было там?
Никто, может быть, какие-то там делали измерения, но никто ничего не говорил. Диагноз, конечно, никто не говорил.
И что, это мальчик, девочка?
Мальчик.
И у него какое заболевание?
Как они мне говорят, ну, насколько врачи, это за счет того, что инфицированная мама. Вот у меня иммунитет пониженный, и я вот всю беременность ходила, мне не было никаких у меня осложнений, а вот ребенок родился с врожденным, у него сепсис, это заражение крови врожденное, и гнойный менингит. Врожденный считается.
И вы это связываете с Чернобылем?
Но они говорят, что пониженный иммунитет, что это все врожденное. А вот сейчас 80% инфицированных женщин, как мне сказали в роддоме. И у нас в роддоме в Мозыре 30% детей от всех рожденных, статистика, проходит через реанимацию. Вот.
Но и пониженный иммунитет, это известно, что Чернобыль влияет?
Наверное, врачи, они же лучше знают. Вот. Ну, что такие инфицированные женщины, они сами даже не подозревают на то, что они... Вот ходит и ребенок у них, хотя анализы показывают. Организм не борется.
Все малые, которые тогда были девочками.
Да. Да, вот у нас в Мозыре мне сама заведующая говорила, что из 600 родившихся детей 230 прошли через реанимацию. Это уже дети уже какие. Вот и оттуда.
Given the magnitude of the disaster, its long-term consequences, international implication, the international community has a humanitarian obligation to assist 9 million people affected by the Chernobyl accident.
What do we know today? Really not too much new.
The representative of the International Agency for Atomic Energy maintains that the Chernobyl catastrophe caused 31 deaths, a few hundred highly irradiated individuals, and 2,000 thyroid cancers in children. This UN agency recognizes only validated data, validated by the laboratories of Los Alamos and the French Atomic Energy Commissariat, CEA, two atomic bomb makers.
Now, the question of the $1 million is the following. Are these predicted effects, which are not detectable, but real? This is what people ask you permanently. My answer to that is the following. This is an epistemological insoluble problem. There are not grounds for direct knowledge at this stage. We don't know. In conclusion, for our conclusion at least, either Chernobyl produced around 30 deaths and 200 severe deterministic injuries clinically attributable to radiation exposure. 2,000 avoidable thyroid cancers in children. Until now, no other confirmed, international confirmed evidence of a public health impact directly attributable to Chernobyl exposure, and I underline radiation exposure. If you need more information, these are my address, and with all pleasure, the agency will be ready to provide copies to you of all these reports that I have mentioned here today. Thank you for your attention.
We said there that the risk of leukemia does not appear to be elevated even among recovery operation workers, and that there are no scientific evidence for increases either in overall cancer incidence or in other non-malignant disorders that could be related to the accident.
The representative of the UN Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation agrees with the IAEA that from a radiological point of view, positive perspectives exist for the future health of most persons in the Chernobyl region. The reports of this committee are used as scientific basis by governments when adopting norms for security and radio protection.
The great majority of the population, and you saw from Dr. Gonzalez's presentation the doses, need not fear serious health consequences as a result of the Chernobyl accident having occurred. This closing slide is one I use for almost any topic. It says, for those who believe, no explanation is necessary. For those who do not believe, no explanation is possible. That can apply to every situation, each way. What we hope to be in the committee and the scientific basis is not using emotion, but being in the middle with the most rigorous possible data so that the people, the decision makers, can get the right information.
Thank you very much.
Ужас, ужас. Почему? Беззастенчивое представление необъективных данных. Они хотят денег меньше тратить на последствия. И поэтому у них любые исследования, которые показывают, что последствия страшнее, чем они думали, они их отвергают. Они говорят, что они недействительны. Но вот для меня страшно то, что это говорится открыто. То, что это представляется как научные выводы. На самом деле это не научные доклады, это не научные выводы.
Є у мене там куски. Тоже еще держу пока.
Радиация не мешает вам?
Мы ее не бачим, яка она не видно. Да.
Мне скажут, наверное, что радиация полезна для здоровья.
Только для старых людей, наверное. Так и говорят, что старые у нас умирают, вот теперь молодые больше, средние.
Да.
Ну, а такие старые живут.
И у детей этих как здоровье? Радиация есть?
У одного один едет на проверку.
У него что-то есть?
Да, вот тут что-то есть.
Чем нос помыл.
А теперь вот у нас кулиту в этой улице было 10 детей. Так улица звенит, еще радиации не было. А вот уже теперь вот, уже вот тут в это 8 детей было. Они такие вот, так, как сонные все равно. Такие, ну, просто не такие дети, треба еще. Весело бегают, катались вот зимой, тепло катались на лед, на санках. А теперь они, коли хочешь, полягут до спят, то сидят.
Мы здесь слышали, что МАГАТЭ с первых дней Чернобыля активно включилась в работу над Чернобылем. Да, мы знаем. Я встречал Ганса Бликса. Вот он что говорил в первые дни после Чернобыля. Атомная индустрия может выдержать такие катастрофы, как Чернобыль, каждый год. Вот с какой идеологией МАГАТЭ подходит к Чернобылю. Этот вывод политизированный. Это вывод людей, которые, или представителей правительств, которые не хотят видеть очевидных последствий Чернобыля.
Alexei Yablokov, president of the Center for Political Ecology of the Russian Federation at the Academy of Sciences, opposes the policy of Putin, who wants to welcome to Russian territory radioactive waste from the international atomic industry.
Произошла необратимая фальсификация государственных данных. Вы что, не знаете, что у нас были арестованы самые главные руководители Госкомитета по статистике, были арестованы 2 года назад за фальсификацию данных? НКДР это знает. Оно знает, что оно пользуется фальсифицированными данными, и пользуется ими, и настаивает на том, что чернобыльские последствия не такие страшные. Говорить о том, что генетических последствий нет у Чернобыля, это удивительно. Генетические последствия – это одни из главных будут теперь. Десятки научных, серьезных, опубликованных в очень серьезных журналах показывают, что генетические последствия серьезны. Вот вам пример еще один интересный. Ну, Юрий Бандажевский сейчас под судом и следствием. Ему предъявлено обвинение, которое грозит ему 9 годами тюрьмы. Кстати говоря, я считал бы, что наша конференция должна была послать какое-то послание по этому поводу. Вот Бандажевский показывает, профессор Бандажевский. Случайные смерти, скоропостижно погибшие, были в основном связаны с инкорпорированными радионуклидами. Если это так, то это еще огромный источник данных, который мы должны приплюсовать к последствиям Чернобыльской катастрофы.
Я еще на пороховой бочке, которая может в любой момент взорваться, совершенно в непредсказуемой ситуации и совершенно не в предсказуемое время.
After 9 years of research in Chernobyl-contaminated territories, Professor Bandashevsky, pathologist, discovered that cesium-137 incorporation with food at low doses leads to the destruction of those vital organs where cesium-137 concentrates at higher levels than the average body level. With his wife Galina, pediatric cardiologist, Bandashevsky described the cesium cardiomyopathy, which, according to several scientists, will bear his name. The cardiac damage becomes irreversible at a certain level and duration of the cesium intoxication. Sudden death may occur at any age, even in children. After publishing these results and denouncing the non-intervention policy of the government, Bandashevsky was jailed for alleged corruption and held under house arrest, pending his trial.
Когда мы открыли вот эту связь нарушений с инкорпорацией радиоцезия, у нас был очень такой конфликт семейный, тяжелый конфликт, потому что я не соглашалась с этими нарушениями. Это такое было сверх какое-то открытие, то есть мы открываем что-то новое, которое до нас еще не было известно. Я боялась, просто вот сама боялась вот этого открытия, потому что
это же
никогда
достижение
у нас, да, это достижение, но никогда у нас так широко скажем так, не рекламировали вот эту радиационную проблему. Да.
Наука только тогда, когда начинает установление какой-то зависимости между любыми параметрами. Здесь должна быть применена логика.
То есть поиск причин.
Причинно-следственная связь. Вы совершенно верно сказали. Должно быть, в этом, может быть, известных несколько параметров, но сочетание их и установление зависимости – это уже наука. Было очень важно. Я жил этому до самого своего ареста. Чтобы люди знали об этом. Дело не в том, кто Бандажевский, Бандажевская, Сидоров, Петров скажет об этом. Ведь у нас же дети гибнут.
Увеличение числа спонтанных абортов и мертворождений, увеличение смертности, увеличение числа ослабленных и больных новорожденных, рост числа генетических нарушений врожденных пороков развития, увеличение числа раковых заболеваний, замедление умственного развития, рост числа психиатрических заболеваний, нарушение иммунитета и изменение гормонального статуса, заболевания органов кровообращения и так далее, аномально медленный рост детей, аномальное истощение, замедленное выздоровление после и ускоренное постарение. По крайней мере, вот этот список, по крайней мере. Бандажевский, тот же самый профессор Юрий Бандажевский, синдром инкорпорированных долгоживущих радионуклидов. Совершенно новый синдром, но ничего не сделаешь, вот он существует. Как от этого можно отказаться? Это наука, это, не говорить об этом просто, мне кажется, неправильно. Спасибо.
Я хотел бы от имени радиологической общественности России, во-первых, извиниться перед международными организациями, которые в бесконечном количестве докладов было представлено, насколько они великую помощь оказывают всем последствиям медицинским последствиям Чернобыля. И, во-вторых, тем совершенно непрофессиональным оценкам, которые сделал господин Яблоков, поскольку он не является ни радиологом, ни радиобиологом, и поэтому все это абсолютно неквалифицировано. Мы ценим эту работу. Мы ценим эту работу международных организаций и рассчитываем, что и в будущем она будет продолжаться так же успешно. Спасибо.
Я не могу оставить это без внимания. Значит, я не против международных организаций. Я за то, чтобы они учитывали то, что я сказал здесь, чтобы они не закрывали глаза на реальные последствия Чернобыльской катастрофы.
Author of a handbook for human and animal radiobiology, Professor Yarmolenko belongs to the team of Professor Ilyin from Moscow, who blocked the evacuation of a major part of the contaminated territories by formulating the famous theory of the 35 rem as an acceptable radiation level for everybody, children, pregnant women, old and ill persons. In reality, the norms allowed by international radio protection authorities for non-professionals are 5 times lower.
Конечно, никто не будет спорить с глубоко уважаемым профессором Ярмоненко о незыблемости постулатов, основ какой-то науки. Это касается и радиобиологии. Но есть и другая сторона этой медали, а именно получение нового знания. И вот, пожалуйста, абсолютно новое знание, которое сейчас получено учеными Radiation Effect Research Foundation в Японии. Это первая публикация 1999 года о том, что есть радиационно индуцированная соматическая заболеваемость. Я и говорю о социально-психологических аспектах получения нового знания и насколько они воспринимаются учеными. Вот, таким образом, я хочу сказать, что я кончаю, позвольте, не мешайте. Я хочу сказать... уважаемая Оксана Горнец, я кончаю, у меня последняя фраза. Таким образом, я думаю, что и Ярмоненко, и все остальные, мы рано или поздно воспримем ту новую информацию, которая у нас есть, и это даст нам возможность делать новые заключения и новые выводы. Благодарю вас за внимание.
Спасибо большое. Я еще раз
Это не новая информация. Как вам не стыдно вообще? Это глупость просто.
Нашего заседания. Будьте любезны. Будьте любезны.
Member of the Genetic Institute of the Academy of Sciences of Belarus, Professor Rose Goncharova studied genetic defects in fish and rodents. These are worsening from year to year in territories with low cesium-137 contamination 200 kilometers from Chernobyl.
Hello. Хозяева. Здравствуйте, дорогой.
Radioactivity is measured in becquerels. 50 becquerels per kilogram body weight in the human organism means that in a child weighing 10 kilograms, 500 artificial radioactive atoms disintegrate every second. Normal levels should be 0 becquerels of cesium-137 per kilo in the organism. 10,000 becquerels were measured in this child.
Сейчас его тело, значит, считайте, каждый килограмм, если 8 килограмм его говорите, значит, 10 тысяч у него вот, вылетает с него частиц в секунду. Они же бьют и в сердечные мышцы. Это может на глаза подействовать, даже на умственное развитие может повлиять. Поэтому не надо так допускать. Ему нельзя давать, как взрослым.
Professor Nestorenko experienced Chernobyl as a shock, which disrupted his life. Member of the Academy of Sciences of Belarus, this internationally renowned physicist had access, during Soviet times, to the forbidden military cities. He understood immediately the seriousness of the accident and asked the Supreme Soviet for an immediate evacuation in a 100-kilometer radius. Labeled as fearmonger, he lost his office as director of the Atomic Energy Institute in Minsk. The KGB put him under pressure and he escaped 2 murder attempts. With a group of experts and technicians, Nestorenko founded an independent institute supported by international foundations. He measures the radioactivity in children and informs families on how to reduce the radionuclide concentration in foodstuffs. He distributes to the most contaminated children a food additive, apple pectin, a natural absorbent which accelerates the excretion of radionuclides from the organism.
78 много.
Павлик, пойдем сюда.
78, это много. Для такого роста, возраста это много.
Nestorenko is the only scientist who systematically measures the internal artificial radioactivity. His measures show that contamination is 8 times higher than that published by the Minister of Health, who tried to stop him. Nestorenko's work being legal, he did not succeed. According to Professor Bandashevsky, over 50 becquerels per kilo body weight lead to irreversible lesions in vital organs.
Don't you think that during 15 years the majority of cesium is internal?
No, it's not internal.
It's not. And
No.
what are you doing?
Are you talking
from
about the external, the exposure that people receive?
I'm speaking of the internal one, which they receive through food in a very large population.
I refuse
After
to think
15
that
years you
whether a radiation dose is internal or external. What counts is the dose received by whatever mechanism. And to prey on people's consciousness to say that somehow because it's internal, it's worse,
I think
does a disservice to the people.
There are cardiac diseases found in human, which may be lethal, found in children, which may lead to sudden death in children.
Okay, but we know the complications. These things are arising. But to simply say that these things have occurred following the accident and to infer from that a blind acceptance that they're radiation related doesn't allow the public health authorities of these countries to serve their people.
They are dose related in children.
I have not seen any information on that.
There are universities in Belarus having worked on this topic for 9 years, and you have never had
any interest to what they did?
Элементарная реабилитация в хорошем, понимаете, условиях в Питере в течение месяца снимает эти неприятности. О чем это
Что-то
говорит?
я не видела. Это временное улучшение. Временное.
Что значит,
Потом
вы
через
не
год
видели?
приходит и дальше. Ну,
Что,
даже,
вы там были,
допустим,
что ли? Откуда
я
вы?
15 лет работаю.
Мы же не знаем, какие у нас будут последствия. Вот от этих маленьких
Почему не
доз,
знаете?
которые постоянно...
Почему не знаете? Ну разве можно говорить, что мы не знаем? Да мы все знаем о радиации. И ничего Чернобыль нового не внес. Он внес только в умы тех, которые ничего не знали. Они стали знать.
Определенную ситуацию, которая отлична от всех других.
Ничего
То есть
подобного.
Хроническое,
Ничего
постоянное.
подобного.
Нет, вы знаете, вот мы, например, у нас, вот вы
А
нас,
спектр
подождите,
такой же?
делали мы доклады в Москве, выступали, мы проводим длительные эксперименты, вводим маленькие дозы цезия, 130 животные, крысы.
Ну каком? Я всю жизнь экспериментатор. Крысы, да.
Изменения могут быть или
Нет, не должны быть. А если вы имеете, то надо 10 раз перепроверить себя. Потому что если вы утверждаете что-то, то это идет в противоречие с существующей классикой. Ну поймите вы это раз навсегда.
Почему мы должны понимать, если мы видим это?
Видите, 10 раз посмотрите.
10 раз
себя
посмотрели.
Нет, не посмотрели
10 раз
вы. Не надо. Не надо. Вы мне вот в глаза смотрите. Вот я говорю, не
смотрю.
смотрели вы 10 раз.
Понимаете, а мы опубликовали, у нас опубликованные
Это не
книги и
имеет
статьи.
значения.
И мы просим нас опровергнуть. Почему
Зачем вам
никто
нас
из
опровергать?
ученых нас не опроверг? Я не
Нет,
могу понять,
вот послушайте.
понимаете? Когда мы называем поглощенные дозы...
Послушайте меня. Мы обязаны, если мы утверждаем, что что-то есть, доказать, что это есть. А степень доказательства сводится к двум вещам. Первое. Должны быть воспроизведены ваши данные любым другим человеком, и прежде всего вами. И второе, они не должны противоречить огромному опыту.
Мы говорим о внутреннем облучении.
Это не имеет значения. И внутреннее, и внешнее.
Я проанализировала огромное количество литературы по действию малых доз.
Не надо большая, малая, это не имеет значения. Ну нельзя им такую безумную радиологическую безграмотность или малограмотность допускать врачам.
Сейчас
Вопросы
придет
радиационной
академик
безопасности очень
Градзинский, он
важны.
поговорит о малых дозах. Алис Стюарт, известная американский ученый, она говорит, Элис Стюарт, да, прекрасный ученый, она тоже разбирается. А может, она них безграмотная. Вот как
Это
вы.
не имеет значения, Стюарт или не Стюарт.
Да,
в Америке,
Ярмоленко,
в Америке,
не
да.
имеет значения.
Да.
Главное то, что умирают дети от малых доз.
Я хочу напомнить, что за эти 15 лет родились новые люди, которые, слава богу, не пережили первого радиационного удара. Они все эти 15 лет едят грязные продукты. Дети получают дозовые нагрузки выше, потому что дозовые коэффициенты, положим, ребенка 3-летнего, он в 5 раз выше, чем взрослого человека. Продукты, как саранча, расползаются по всей республике. И неудивительно, что мы в столице, в Минске, нашли детей с накоплением 700-900 беккерелей на килограмм. Я хотел бы обратить внимание на работу профессора Бандажевского. Значит, мы с ним работали параллельно. То есть он пришел к такому заключению, что 50 беккерелей на килограмм по детям – это является граница, когда уже проявляется патология таких жизненно важных органов, как почки, печень, сердце и другие. В общем, сегодня я сказал бы так, что состояние здоровья детей таково, что если мы не примем мер срочных, то я не очень вижу большие перспективы с нашими детьми. Спасибо.
Вы сказали, что у вас дети наиболее облучаемая популяция по отношению к взрослым. Те данные, которые по сечам представлял Минздрав, это официальные данные, они показывают, что критические группы – это отдельные профессиональные группы среди взрослых. У вас же оказались дети. Как вот вы разрешаете в Беларуси вот такое принципиальное противоречие? Дети по внутреннему облучению, по цезию, оказались критической группой.
Ну, я могу сказать одно. Мы измеряем все население, а затем выделяем критическую группу. Мы выделяем там 10-15 человек, кто имеет большие накопления. Как правило, 8 человек из них составляют дети, попадают обычно механизаторы, лесники, может быть, иногда попадают пенсионеры, но это понятно за счет активного потребления даров природы. Это те цифры, с которыми я повторяю. У нас 110 тысяч результатов измерения. Мы всегда считали, что у детей быстро идут обменные процессы, и они много не должны накапливать. Но, к сожалению, я повторяю, мы самые большие накопления находим у детей.
Vice Director of the Scientific Center for Biophysics in Moscow, Dr. Savkin is a member of the International Commission for Radiation Protection. He believes that the internal irradiation is marginal compared to the external irradiation.
Я считаю, что действительно нормализация ситуации в обществе должна идти не столько по пути снижения сейчас уже очень невысоких доз облучения, сколько по восстановлению социальной структуры, занятости людей, медицинской помощи по тем болезням, которые не обусловлены радиацией, но возникают у этих людей.
In 1986, Dr. Kuskova was the chief physician of the hospital number 6 of the Kurchatov Nuclear Research Institute in Moscow. Before they died, she took care of the 28 highly irradiated liquidators of Chernobyl. She belongs to the group of Soviet scientists who, in accordance with the IAEA, minimized the radiological component by psychiatrizing the health problems, using the diagnosis of radiophobia and stress.
I myself presented a paper with Molly Scott relating to an increase in infant leukemia in 5 different countries of Europe and also the United States, and this was certainly and unambiguously an effect of Chernobyl.
Chris Busby was a member of the UK Governmental Research Committee on the risks of incorporated radiation. He is Scientific Secretary of the European Committee on Radiation Risks, and he coordinated the publication of the guidelines on health effects of exposition on low doses of ionizing radiation for radio protection.
I would make the point that the European Parliament recently passed a resolution asking for a reassessment of the dose-risk model because of low-dose effects which emerged after the Chernobyl accident in the countries that I mentioned earlier and I mentioned in my paper. And I feel that this conference should call for a re-examination of the dose-risk models. Now, there's a very great deal of evidence in the last 10 years, and certainly evidence that has been presented at this conference and by us and by other workers, that very low doses of radiation have a significantly high effect, a proportionately higher effect. And this calls into question the whole radiation risk model. And I do not think attention should be focused only on the groups that were significantly opposed to radiation, because if such is the case, then many radiation effects from Chernobyl will be entirely missed.
Yes, you remember that in 1996 or 7, WHO and IAEA was at a meeting in Sevilla in Spain, and we determined the definition of those ionizing radiation, the not minimum minimum risk level of low dose radiation. We have already very clear recommendation. So I think that your statement is correct, and it should be included the more precise way.
Yeah, all right, well, if we can recommend as a conference that more research should go into the evaluation of the effects of very low doses.
Those the radiation.
Yes, yes, yes.
I agree. Yeah. Okay, so this is an additional sentence.
Thank you.
Yes.
In spite of the fact that it was accepted in the plenary, the proposal of Chris Busby was not included among the research programs in the final resolution of the conference.
Когда сегодня, по прошествии уже 15 лет после аварии, становится совершенно ясным, что радиационный фактор не является ведущим. Все, что было для острых эффектов, это закончилось. Он продолжает являться фактором не самоиндуцируемым, а в связи вот с теми везом огромным количеством социальных факторов. Не уделять сегодня уже, когда все прошло, представление о том, что надо какие-то выводить изотопы откуда-то, что нужно бороться с какой-то, так сказать, хронической лучевой патологией и прочее, нет.
Мы не болеем не от отсутствия хлеба, опухолями и так далее, а именно радиационный фактор. Спасибо.
У меня сейчас поднималось давление, и болела голова, когда у меня поднимается давление. В 98 году у меня был инсульт. Я все лето пролежал в больнице, 3 месяца.
И что у тебя было, когда у тебя инсульт был?
Вот у меня левая нога отнялась, рука отнялась, и вот тут вот лицо, левая часть. У меня врожденный порог сердца.
Ну, а ты как это чувствуешь?
Себя? Нормально.
У тебя болит сердце? Что у тебя сердце? Дома у тебя болело?
Колет. Когда побегаю, да колет.
Колет?
Да.
Где точно?
Вот здесь вот.
С 3 месяцев у меня обнаружили шумы в сердце, и сюда теперь на обследование.
Ты можешь играть, бегать?
Нет.
Почему?
Одышка сильная.
Тяжело.
Тяжело бегать. Темно в глазах, темнеет.
Статистически это нормально в детском возрасте?
Нет, нет. По численному составу, конечно, этот процент у нас увеличивается. То есть деток продолжается
увеличиваться.
Да. И, конечно, экология тоже играет свою определенную роль.
Экология – это Чернобыль практически.
Конечно.
Он усугубил то, что было.
Да, он здоровье, так сказать, не прибавил ни детям, ни другому населению у нас.
Я уже перенес 3 инфаркта, приступа сердечных.
3 приступа?
Да, было и поверхностный гастрит.
А когда эти приступы были?
Маленький был. Это в начальной школе еще учился когда.
Ага. Тебе сейчас сколько?
12.
Это ненормально в таких возрастах иметь такие заболевания взрослых?
Ну, мы будем говорить, что сейчас возрастные понятия этих заболеваний, они несколько изменились. И действительно много того, что раньше относилось только к взрослому возрасту, теперь мы вот видим у наших детей.
Меня положили в больницу из-за того, что у меня поднялось, я был у бабушки, у меня поднялось давление высокое, и голова кружилась, я не мог встать. Меня привезли сюда.
Угу.
Я уже лежу тут 3 недели.
3 недели, да?
И обнаружили, что у меня порог сердца, наверное.
Тебе сколько?
Что 13.
Это измеряют на сечах, например, были какие-то, есть у них загрязнения в организме?
В нашей больнице этой возможности нет, но дети, живущие в районах жесткого контроля, туда приезжают выездные лаборатории, и детское население определяется. Но такие районы у нас не все считаются.
Health ministries in Belarus, Ukraine and Russia do not establish a link between internal contamination in children and the diseases treated in hospitals. If they did, and if the correlation found by Bandashevsky between the cesium-137 concentration and lesions in vital organs was systematically checked, an effective prevention policy would become possible regarding the worrisome increase of new disease in children living in contaminated regions.
Большая проблема в том, мы в ОНЕ не можем получить эти статистики. Никто из вашего правительства нам не высылает эти статистики. И вот в этом проблема. Если мы не получим официальные статистики вон, мы не можем ничего делать. У нас нет информации ни из Украины, ни из Беларуси, ни из России. Никакой из 3 стран.
Я хочу вам еще дать доклад профессора Бандажевского. Вы знаете его?
Знаю. Очень хорошо.
Вот это вот клубочки.
On June the 18th, Yuri Bandashevsky, author of more than 400 scientific publications and 8 monographs, owner of 7 patents, member of 5 academies, recipient of 5 international awards, was condemned by the military court of the Supreme Court of Belarus to 8 years in a work camp for alleged corruption. 1 year of inquiry could produce no proof against him.
Посмотрите, показания свидетеля Янкелевича, который сказал, что да,
я передал Бандажевскому $7000 за поступление брата и сестры к Резу. Что это не доказательство?
Under the rule of law, such an assertion, which has never been proved, is considered libel. Amnesty International adopted Bandashevsky as a prisoner of conscience. The European Parliament gave him the passport for liberty, demanding that he be allowed to resume his research. The European Union called for a revision of the trial, stained by 8 violations of the Belarusian Criminal Code. The importance of the conference lies in the adoption of a final resolution. The recommendations will be the founding basis of the government's decisions on radio protection. Every word will be weighed and discussed because the future health of millions of people and also the good reputation of the nuclear industry depend on them.
Катастрофа, да, безусловно. Но не радиационная, как таковая, не главное.
Вы, Самуил Петрович, успокойтесь. Вы прямо как Ангелина Константиновна.
Ну, как я могу успокоиться? Вы понимаете, если вот сейчас я опять работать буду над следующим изданием книги, учебника, а все это идет к чертовой матери добавки, извините, ради бога.
Вы можете понять, что здесь... Вот уже сейчас же будет страшное волнение по поводу проекта решения, вы не думаете. Мы еще сегодня поработаем с вами вечером.
Ну, ради бога.
Да, потому что
надо обязательно сделать, чтобы он был грамотный.
даже МАГАТЭ поняла, что нужно обходить острые углы.
Это правильно.
А вы прямо стреляете.
Нет, это правильно. Это правильно. Дипломатия некоторой степени нужна. Но не безграмотно.
Ну нет, ну здесь безграмотно.
Должно быть только грамотно.
Ваше мнение, что это не радиационный?
Что радиационный здесь фактор среди прочих, причем он самый маленький.
Хорошо.
Ну попробуй убеди кого.
Чей? Телевидение? Ну, швейцарский такой же, как наш.
According to the line maintained by the 3 UN agencies, the authors of the final resolution do not mention in its text the new scientific evidence presented at the conference concerning the health effects of CS-137 incorporated in the body. Today, out of 100 children in Belarus, only 20 can be declared officially to be healthy. Before the Chernobyl catastrophe, the number was 80 out of 100. The IAEA, the UNSCEAR and the World Health Organization, who do not study the effects of the internal contamination by incorporated radionuclides, have no explanation for the increased incidence of somatic pathologies in those children.
Thank you very much, sir. Arigato. Спасибо. И вам огромное спасибо. Для меня это большое удовольствие.
Давайте, не забывайте.
А как вас можно забыть?
Нет, No, we can't go back. Да, we can go. We can go.
Workers at the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant will soon resume one of their key operations for decommissioning the reactors. They say human error likely halted fuel transfer work at one of the reactor buildings. Workers have been transferring hundreds of fuel assemblies from the storage pool at the damaged reactor building. They're being taken to a safer facility nearby. On Wednesday, a crane hoisting a container of fuel assemblies suddenly stopped. Tokyo Electric Power Company officials say a worker mistakenly tried to operate the crane while the brake was on. The error set off an alarm and locked the crane's motor. TEPCO officials say they will take preventive measures and resume fuel transfer operations soon. Japanese government officials have designated areas that need to bolster their preparations for possible major earthquakes and tsunami. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe made the designations based on advice from the Government Council on Disaster Prevention. The move is aimed at being ready in the event of major quakes. They're focusing on the possibilities of one hitting underneath Tokyo and the other along the Nankai Trough of central and western Japan.
These earthquakes could have a serious effect on the country's society and economy. They could impact the capital's key functions, and tsunami could cause widespread damage. The government will make a unified and speedy effort to implement anti-disaster measures.
A total of 310 municipalities in Tokyo and 9 neighboring prefectures were designated as areas that need to take urgent anti-disaster steps. 707 municipalities spanning nearly 30 prefectures were named as areas that should strengthen preparations for a Nankai trough quake. Officials say the regions could be hit by a tremor with an intensity of 6- or more and tsunami waves 3 meters or higher. The Japanese intensity scale runs from 0 to 7. They say almost 140 municipalities could be inundated within 30 minutes after a Nankai quake. The communities have been designated as areas eligible for greater state support to help prepare for tsunami. Prosecutors in Tokyo have asked a court to impose a fine on the former governor. Naoki Inose is suspected of violating the public office's election law by failing to report a loan for his election campaign. The prosecutors say Inose received $500,000 from the Tokushikai Medical Group before a gubernatorial election 2 years ago. Inose initially said it was a personal loan, but he later agreed to regard the money as a loan for his campaign. The acknowledgement came after the former head of the Tokushikai and his son said that the loan was meant for use in the election campaign. Inose corrected his campaign finance records on Friday. Prosecutors have decided not to seek a full trial, considering that he has resigned as governor. Inose could face a fine of up to $5,000.
Executives say they will try to provide internet access to people in remote areas of the world using drones and satellites. Officials who run the world's biggest social network say they have set up a team for the project. Team members include aviation and communication experts from NASA and a British drone manufacturer. The group is already developing solar-powered drones capable of flying long distances. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg said he is aiming to make basic internet services available to all the people in the world. Another IT giant, Google, has also started a project to use helium balloons to provide internet services. It plans to offer access at speeds similar to those of 3G networks to areas 40 kilometers in diameter.
These trade officials are considering phasing out taxes on EU wine imports. That's in return for concessions on exports of Japanese industrial goods. Sources told NHK the officials plan to make the offer in talks for a Japan-EU economic partnership agreement. They say the officials are prepared to remove the tariffs gradually over 7 years. Negotiators from the two sides are expected to focus on these and other cuts when they meet in Tokyo on Monday. Importers pay tariffs of about $1.2 per litre on EU wine, or 15% of the price. Sources say Japanese officials are also considering scrapping import taxes on some processed tomato products. In return, EU negotiators are reportedly preparing to scrap tariffs on some auto parts and electrical appliances, but the sources say the two sides have a long way to go to resolve their differences.
The people in charge of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant have another problem on their hands. They say they found water pouring into a drain inside a reactor building. Officials at Tokyo Electric Power Company say they don't know where the water is coming from, and they're not sure how much radioactive material it contains. Workers spotted the leak on the first floor of the Reactor 3 building in video footage from a remote-controlled robot. They say it's about 30 centimeters wide and constant. TEPCO officials say the water is probably flowing toward the basement. A large amount of radioactive water has accumulated there. The officials say rainwater may have gotten into the building. Radiation levels are too high for workers to approach the site, so officials are trying to find the source of the leak by analyzing the video footage.
I'm Artie Gunderson from Fairwinds. In order to build more nuclear power plants as the nuclear industry would like, or start up the vulnerable plants in Japan that Prime Minister Abe is pushing to do, or to continue to operate the hazardous Mark I reactors that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission continues to allow to be run without their Fukushima modifications. Nuclear power corporations and proponents worldwide need you to accept these 4 myths. The first myth is that nuclear power is safe and that there is no risk. Nuclear proponents claim that it is clean, safe, and green, and that it's the world's answer to climate change. They also claim that the chance of a nuclear meltdown is 1 in a million per reactor year. Do the math. There's 400 nuclear plants. So that calculates out to no meltdowns in 2,500 years. If those 400 plants had begun operation when the Parthenon was built, there still would never have been a nuclear accident. Well, history's proven that figure to be wrong. There have been 5 meltdowns in the last 35 years. In other words, 1 meltdown every 7 years. If all of the coal plants and the oil plants worldwide were replaced by nuclear power plants, the math shows we could expect 1 meltdown every year. Is that a risk you're willing to take? The second myth is that no one has died as a result of nuclear accidents. The truth is that as many as 1 million people have already died from radiation releases due to nuclear power plant accidents, without counting any of the radiation-induced cancer deaths expected from Fukushima. In his landmark cancer study following the 3 Mile Island accident, epidemiologist Dr. Steve Wing definitively showed that there were significant cancers. You can check out Dr. Wing's full presentation at the Pennsylvania State House on the 30th anniversary of the 3 Mile Island accident. It's on the Fairwinds website. As many as 1 million people have died at Chernobyl, according to Dr. Alexei Yablokov in his landmark book, Chernobyl, Consequences of a Catastrophe for People and the Environment. Worse yet, in an effort to hide the truth, key Soviet scientists were thrown in jail when they published Chernobyl mortality data indicating cesium-caused heart deformities in young children. Jailing scientists and destroying data that proved illnesses and death doesn't mean that nuclear power radiation-induced deaths did not occur. Maggie and I discussed this brave scientist and other whistleblowers around the world in our recent presentation at Clarkson University, which is also featured on the Fairwinds website. The third myth that nuclear proponents want you to believe is that nuclear power is the only feasible alternative to global warming. Again, it's not true. Nuclear power is not new, and it's not modern, but instead is a technology developed more than 60 years ago and is dependent on large electric distribution centers. We've entered the second decade of a new century since those nuclear reactors were built. And thanks to advancement in computer technology, it's now possible to successfully supply electricity from small renewable sources to almost anywhere. Technological advancements that have created cell phones that have replaced landlines, laptops with more computing power than old mainframe computers, are now capable of replacing giant obsolete power stations with small, locally controlled and locally owned sources of power. I had a long discussion about new power options with one of my personal heroes, Amory Lovins, founder of the Rocky Mountain Institute. That video is also available on the Fairwinds website. Nuclear, gas, oil, and coal proponents claim that the sun doesn't shine at night, and therefore a renewable electric grid is impossible. These same people and corporations are wedded to an old power industry paradigm that asserts that it's possible to safely store the most hazardous radioactive substance known to man for 250,000 years. Well, I contend that if scientists can safely store toxic nuclear material for thousands and thousands of years, then scientists are certainly capable of designing electric storage that will last overnight. In fact, solar storage technology is already available. The fourth and the final myth that nuclear corporations want you to believe is that nuclear power is cheap. In fact, the cost of a world full of nuclear power plants is prohibitive and would actually leave less money to fund real carbon reduction. New nuclear plants in Georgia and South Carolina and in the United Kingdom will charge twice as much for the nuclear electricity as other energy sources. Former NRC Commissioner Peter Bradford, who served on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission during the TMI accident, said, "Trying to solve global warming by building nuclear power plants is like trying to solve global hunger by serving everyone caviar." I'm a nuclear engineer. I was a reactor physics instructor and directed nuclear power plant decommissioning, nuclear fuel rack design and construction. I bought into this technology and these nuclear power myths until I saw every safety system fail and witnessed a triple meltdown at Fukushima Daiichi. Nuclear power is not safe. It does kill people. It can be replaced with renewables, and it's too expensive to make a meaningful contribution to our world. I'm Arnie Gunderson. I'll keep you informed.
Next, radiation, tainted soil, buildings left exposed to the elements. Areas within the evacuation zone of Japan's Fukushima prefecture face countless challenges in trying to reestablish themselves. People who lived in places where the contamination is relatively low are hoping to return within a few years. But they now face another impediment. While they've been gone, hybrids of wild boars and domestic pigs have been moving in.
Former residents of Tomioka have been cleared to spend the daylight hours in their town, but they've got company. Hybrid pigs roam freely throughout the area. Unlike wild boars, they are not wary of humans. They don't run away even if people approach them. That also means they're not shy about making themselves at home. This man has been returning to his home from time to time in hopes of eventually moving back permanently. One day, he found his house had turned into a pigsty.
I closed the doors, but they open them and walk around with muddy feet.
The pigs ate all the sugar and salt he had stored on his porch. They didn't stop there. Anything else that was edible they got to, including cooking oil.
Wild boars do not enter homes. They hate the smell of humans. Hybrid pigs are different. Our smell makes them happy.
In Japan, hybrid pigs are raised for meat. They are the offspring of male wild boars and female domestic pigs. Their meat is said to be less fatty than that of ordinary pigs and to smell less. Like wild boars, the hybrids have ravenous appetites. They eat all types of food, including plants and meat. On the other hand, they resemble domestic pigs in their lack of fear of humans, so they're not shy about breaking and entering a human abode. Even as humans are required to stay away for the most part, the hybrid animal population is multiplying. Each sow has about 10 piglets a year. That's twice the birth rate of wild boars. At the time of the nuclear disaster, only one farming household in the entire evacuation zone was raising such hybrid pigs, about 20 in all. It was in the town of Tomioka. These days, hybrids have been seen or caught in 5 communities, and their numbers are believed to have reached at least several hundred. Quite likely, domestic pigs and hybrid pigs left behind by their owners have been mating with wild boars.
They're expanding their habitat since nobody lives there now. This is an unusual state of affairs. We need to reduce their numbers gradually and return to a normal environment.
Cities, towns, and villages in the evacuation zone have started culling the animals with the cooperation of hunting clubs. Many hunters, however, have gone elsewhere. Animals near the nuclear power plant are contaminated and unfit to eat. The more hybrid pigs there are in Tomioka, the less enthusiastic some people become about moving back. Katsutoshi Sakamoto is a livestock farmer. He cannot bring products to market under current conditions, but he continues to take care of his cattle. He says hybrid pigs have been causing him trouble since last summer, breaking into the cattle barn and eating the feed.
Those pigs, I've had enough. Every time I set out feed for my calves, they gobble it up.
Sakamoto bought a large amount of rice as feed, but the pigs made short work of it. No matter what he does to drive them away, they eventually wander back. Sakamoto says if this goes on, he'll have to abandon the idea of coming back home. That would be a real blow, both psychologically and financially.
They did it again today. And this time they broke down a door. What can I do? I can't take it anymore.
Spring is prime time for breeding. So many piglets will be appearing in the coming months. The more they grow, the hungrier they'll get, making the plans of people to repopulate the area all the more difficult to achieve.
Well, the Environment Ministry has been involved in trying to cull hybrid pigs since last November, but it's had only limited success. Even if hunters can be found to do the job, they're only allowed to stay in the area for a limited time because of radiation. The animals, however, unlike people, have no way of knowing they'd be better off foraging somewhere else.
Another mechanical defect has struck cleanup efforts at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. Engineers have again had to abandon a sophisticated water filtration device. Tokyo Electric Power Company workers have been using a machine known as the Advanced Liquid Processing System, or ALPS, to remove radioactive substances from water. But the system has been plagued with trouble. TEPCO managers now say a crane that was moving containers of toxic water to the system has failed. TEPCO says it does not know when the operations can resume.
まだ不具合の箇所というのは特定できておりませんで
We have stopped all functions of ALPS. We have not identified the cause of the problem. We will carry out repairs on the crane and restart the system.
3系統とも停止をしている状態でございます。
There are about 1,000 tanks full of contaminated water at the plant. An additional 400 tons is accumulating every day. TEPCO executives earlier announced their goal of decontaminating all water stored in the tanks by March 2015.
Operators of the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant have restarted a system that treats contaminated water, but there are concerns about the system's reliability. Workers on Friday put the Advanced Liquid Processing System, or ALPS, back online. It shut down on Tuesday when a crane used to transfer radioactive materials stopped working. It was the latest in a series of problems that have hit the system. One of the crane's 4 motors broke down, but Tokyo Electric Power Company says it can now operate the crane using the other 3 motors. The company says it will replace the faulty motor and find out the cause of the malfunction. Dealing with the huge amount of contaminated water at Fukushima Daiichi is a major challenge. The company plans to use the system to remove almost all radioactive substances from the water by March 2015.
The leaders of Turkey and Japan are working to bring their countries even closer together. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will be sitting down in Tokyo with his counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He threw a welcoming ceremony for the Turkish premier at a state guest house. The honor guard saluted Erdogan and Abe. The leaders will hold a summit later in the day. They're expected to discuss the start of talks for an economic partnership agreement. And they'll likely confirm they will work toward putting a nuclear cooperation pact into effect as soon as possible. The agreement would allow Japan to export its nuclear technology to Turkey, where a Japanese-French consortium has won an order to build a nuclear plant. This is their third time in 8 months that Abe and Erdogan have met for talks.
The people in charge of a plan to reprocess spent nuclear fuel in Japan are trying to get it up and running. They've asked nuclear regulators to conduct a safety assessment. The check would be the first of its kind since stricter safety rules took effect last month. Kazuhiro Matsumura, vice president of Japan Nuclear Fuel, filed the application with the Nuclear Regulation Authority. The plant in Rokkasho village plays a central role in the Japanese government's fuel recycling policy. The goal is to reprocess spent fuel so it can be used again. Executives in charge of the plant strengthened measures against earthquakes in anticipation of the new safety regulations. They also installed water pumps and spraying equipment to respond to accidents.
We intend to operate the facility properly, so we hope the screening will be carried out efficiently.
Executives plan to complete the plant by October. They hope to then start full-scale operations. Testing at the plant is already underway, but work to complete the facility has been postponed 21 times following a series of problems. The chairman of the Nuclear Regulation Authority said it's unclear how long the screening will take. Officials at a nuclear power plant in western Japan have come up with extra measures aimed at protecting the facility in the event of a severe accident. The move comes as Japan's nuclear authority has been conducting a safety review at the Ikata plant. Officials at Shikoku Electric Power Company want to restart one of the plant's reactors. The Nuclear Regulation Authority found that measures at the plant against tornadoes and fires were inadequate. In response, workers have covered a tank for heavy oil with 20-centimeter thick cushioning material made of aluminum and stainless steel. The tank will now be resistant to the impact of an object traveling 360 kilometers an hour blown by the wind. The oil would be used to power an emergency generator. Workers also cut down all trees within 35 meters of the oil tank to prevent fire from spreading. They are now installing 2 layers of filters on a building that would serve as a command center in case of a severe accident. The filters would protect the building from radioactive materials in the air.
Workers are about to begin preparing to drain underground tunnels at the disabled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. This comes before the start of a project to freeze the earth around the openings of the tunnels to block the flow of contaminated water. The tunnels are believed to be one of the sources of radioactive materials that are polluting the groundwater at the facility on a large scale. Workers at Tokyo Electric Power Company plan to block the flow of tainted water between the damaged buildings and the tunnels. The workers will start burying pipes in the ground to carry refrigerants later this month. They plan to start draining the contaminated water from the tunnels in April after the freezing work is completed. TEPCO will also begin testing a plan to freeze soil over a large area. The eventual goal is to surround the reactor buildings and other facilities with walls of ice to prevent fresh groundwater from seeping in beneath the facilities. A large amount of highly radioactive water has accumulated beneath the plant. TEPCO officials will also set up radiation monitoring equipment at various hot spots on the floors of reactor buildings. The readings will be used to support the decontamination work by robots that will follow. Officials say they will also study how to remotely locate and repair holes in the reactor containment vessels. The vessels were broken in the nuclear accident. Workers at nuclear plants along Japan's Pacific coast have raised their level of readiness in accordance with the tsunami advisory, and the operator of one plant has reported a change in nearby sea levels. Officials at the Tokai No. 2 power station in Ibaraki Prefecture observed waves of about 10 centimeters at 7:35 a.m. Japan time. None of Japan's other nuclear facilities on the Pacific coast have reported seeing any changes in tide levels, including Fukushima Daiichi. Officials there have put up temporary breakwaters at the facility as a precaution. The people in charge of the plant say crews have moved water pumps and emergency power generators to higher ground, and they've warned workers to stay away from the shore.